themes that you can pick up on, but it requires a little bit of thoughtfulness, and that's not something that we necessarily value in our society either.
No, it isn't. I mean, you're exactly right, Kirby. We live in the soundbite era. We live in the rapid movement of entertainment and all of that. And to some extent, we're being trained not to think. We're being trained to live in a virtual world that isn't real. And it's going to take the body of Christ being healthy and vibrant, being knowledgeable to understand, first of all, for example, how has God designed social order? And what are the consequences when we go against that design? We are suffering horribly under the consequences of saying no to God and to go our own way, to go our own path. And it's going to require the patience and the love and the compassion and the hard truth associated with helping people understand the reality of the world around us. The reality is God has created it, and the consequences people suffer from are the result of denying that and kicking against God. That can happen, quite frankly, and I don't mean for this to sound the way it might sound, that can't happen in an elevator speech.
Nope.
That has to happen over a period of time where people have begun to trust you, not look at you as a manipulator.
And again, we've talked about awaken and engage. Let's stay on engage for just a minute, and that is also to recognize that the net goal, or the end goal, however you want to say it, is not only the change in an individual's life, but a change in their family and a change in their community. And that doesn't happen overnight either, because like you said, we're in a soundbite culture. We expect the microwave to be done within 1 minute. And yet, if you're going to change culture, it's going to take a lot longer than that, isn't it?
It absolutely is true. We haven't gotten in this situation overnight, and we are not going to get out of it overnight, even though we want to, right? We want to, we just vote the right way and things will all be. It won't. It's going to require the people of God in that patient, doing that due diligence, doing that work in deep relationships in a smaller number of people, and praying that God is going to open people's eyes, that they're going to give, He will give an opportunity for us to speak. Those are the things that have to happen, and I think it can happen. Kirby, we still have, if you can believe it, we still have a large remnant in this culture. I mean, we have been shaking our fist in the face of God for 100 years, and, God should have turned us into a France or the Netherlands by now. But He has a huge remnant here. Why? Because God is not through with us yet. And hopefully and prayerfully, we will see the body of Christ awakened, to become strengthened, and to be the light and salt that we're supposed to be.
Well, let's take a break, but just before we do so, I want to come back in just a minute and not only talk about this idea of awaken and engage, but restore. And I understand that you also, in addition to having an engagement project, have a plan for a restoration project. So I want to come back and talk about what that means. There's always something happening with Del Tackett, and the grass is never growing under his feet. So again, you can find all sorts of great material on our website, pointofview.net, or you can go simply to his website, deltackett.com. Either way, we have that information. So we'll take a break and come back and finish off by talking about how you can get involved. But I hope that you'll take the time to maybe click on that button that allows you to be a trainer, because this is something that is supposed to take place in a small group. So maybe you're willing to step out and train. Now, I'll be wise to point out the fact that usually those of us that teach learn more than anybody else in the group. So that's certainly one benefit of that. And then you're going to find, as you go to the website there, some of his articles, some of his posts, and some of this information on this new idea, which is called the Engagement Project. Sooner or later, we're going to come out of lockdown. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure there will be some conferences that you will want to know about. So make sure that you take the time to sign up and make sure that you're on that mailing list so that you have the kind of information that you need there as well. But let's take a break, and when we come back, we've been talking about a couple of different aspects of not only Awaken, Engage, but maybe give you a preview of Restore. We certainly need restoration as well. We'll talk about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Bill Tackett back with us for a few more minutes. And again, I wanted you to know about the Engagement Project, but we've talked about Awaken, Engage. How about Restore? And you are now working on also this idea of a restoration project. So I'd love to know some more about that, because that's maybe a future opportunity for, again, many of our listeners.
Well, yes, that's kind of the next step, although I will tell you, you mentioned the Is Genesis history. In a couple weeks, I'm going to begin to do some more filming with Compass Cinema.
Oh, good.
On what I guess may be called Is Genesis History 2. I'm excited about that. I love working with these scientists, but the restoration project, we're already working and talking about what that might look like. But in a nutshell, what that is that if we look at the design of God for social order, And I think it's a major part of God's creation and design. Why? Because he is a socially complex creature. He is the triune God. Everything that he has made is in relationships, systems of systems, pieces and parts working together. And of course, the family, the sphere of labor, the state, the church, all of these institutions that God has designed are for the purpose of God's creatures being fruitful, and that fruit brings glory to God. And so the Restoration Project is going to look at each of these institutions again, and with the benchmark being, how has God designed this institution? And then look at the pathologies that have come as a result of kicking against God. And then the outcome of all of that, of looking at those individual pathologies, and it will be a field work. We'll go to Detroit, and we'll stand in the middle of Detroit and say, what happened to the city?
Mm-hmm.
We will talk about what has happened to the black family and why. And then hopefully what we'll do is provide the means by which God's people, if they are called by God to work in one of those areas of pathology. You know, Kerby, we are so disorganized in the body of Christ.
That's so true.
You know, we jump from this to that. You know, we get a letter with triple underlines, and we do this. And if we would just get organized based upon the call of God, based upon what breaks our heart in these pathologies, and then organize people. We'll have a champion. You know, let's say it's in human trafficking or homelessness or one of these pathologies, and we'll have a champion who will gather together all the current data and know exactly the issue and so forth, and then to work with people who are called to do that, and then organize people to try and restore that area. Because, you know, without that restoration, you know as well as I do, we're talking about the misery, the agony of a people that are suffering the consequences of kicking against God, that they're captives, right? That's
yes.
what 2 Timothy tells us. They've been taken captive by the enemy to do his will, and they're blinded. And we are the people that need, you know, we were the people who stepped in and built the orphanages. We're the people who built the hospitals. We're the people who started the universities. That's us. That's the people of God. And it's time for us to do those things again.
Again, address that whole issue of cultural captivity, which is the case. And again, I've mentioned, of course, the Truth Project, and of course we've mentioned is Genesis History, the Engagement Project, even the future idea of a restoration project. But before you go, I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't spend just a minute talking about socialism, because I have noticed that Del Tackett is really talking about socialism a lot. Socialism and Marx, socialism and Marx and the Pandora's box, socialism, Marx and America, socialism, the creation of a victim class, and on and on. And of course, this is something we talk about so often, because the younger you are, the more likely you are to think that socialism is the answer to our problems. Of course, it is not, but it is something you've been addressing. I'd love to get your comments on that.
Sure. Kerby, this is something that, I mean, I have studied Marxism from a worldview perspective for years and years, but I've never really focused on it the way I have recently. And I don't want to be overstating things or so forth, but the more I studied Marx and read his writings, his poetry, and those sorts of things, I agree with others like Wurmbrand and others who studied Marx, and they believed that Marx was under, we'll just put it mildly, under a demonic influence. And the ideas of Marx, the more you look at them, the more you realize they are just so antithetical, anti-Christian. They are so against everything that God has designed that it is an evil theory, And it results, of course, all you have to do is look at what has happened in the Soviet Union and the gulags and North Korea and Venezuela. It's an evil, evil thing. And yet it has penetrated our universities deeply. And I remember Dr. Noble used to say, that when Marxists want to get trained, they come to Duke University. And it was not just Duke, it's the Columbia and so forth. And so what we've done is we have created a whole generation, multiple generation of students who come through that. And they have bought what I believe is the scam, because socialism is a scam. It lays out all of these wonderful utopian ideas, and that you as the victim class, if you rise up against the hegemony and to overthrow it, then it will all be distributed, but it's not true, because the tyrants rule, and the working class becomes worse than before. And so yes, I've been writing. In fact, I'm working right now on helping people understand intersectionality.
Very good.
But sorry, I get spun up with this because not simply from just a clinical worldview perspective, but Kerby, this destroys the lives of people.
It does. And again, we've talked about that before. We've talked about this in terms of critical race theory, intersectionality, and all the rest. And maybe I'll get you back on one of those again, because we've certainly got those links for people to read on the website. But just before we let you go, let's again talk about what people can find. This is an opportunity for people to be trained in this new venture, which is called the Engagement Project, right?
Yes. Yes, it is. And so I'll go to deltackett.com. Hopefully there is enough clear signage there that they can begin to get the online training and to lead a small group, and pray that God is going to use that. I just pray God will use it to get the body of Christ healthy and vibrant, to be light and salt again.
Again, I encourage you to pray for Del and to actually follow some of the great material that he has there. Truth Project, Engagement Project, even a Future Restoration Project, of course, is Genesis History, and much, much more. And always great to have you on the program. Let's take a break, though. Just before we finish off today, we're going to spend some time talking about this issue of sex education and the State Board of Education. And we'll be talking with Lori Kuykendall, who's the head of the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. It is another issue that you need to be aware of, and I think you're going to enjoy this conversation with her. She'll be in studio, and if you've always had some questions about what we can and should teach in the public schools about human sexuality and some of the things we shouldn't be teaching, we'll be talking with her about that right after these important messages.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about this issue of sex education, especially in the public schools. And that has always been controversial, but as you will find out very quickly, there are all sorts of advocacy groups that want to add a whole lot more to what your children and grandchildren might be studying in the schools. So that's why we thought it would be appropriate to spend some time talking with Lori Kuykendall, who's been on the program with us before. 25 years of experience in community health education with her degree from Texas A&M in community health education, and just about ready to get her master's degree in public health from Liberty University. We last time had her in when she was, of course, heading up Aim for Success, which is merged with Just Say Yes, but she is now the head of the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, and we have this press release that you can find on our website. But Lori, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It's always a joy to visit with you and your listeners.
Let's, if we can, talk about the Medical Institute, because some of our listeners who have been listeners to Point of View for a long time remember when we used to do interviews. I think that first was back in the 1980s. So this is an institute that's been around for a while, hasn't it?
It has. Dr. Joe McElhaney founded Medical Institute for Sexual Health in 1992, left his full-time OBGYN practice there in Austin to run the Medical Institute full-time 3 years later in 1995, and returned last summer. He did actually at the age of 84 to be the president and CEO, to re-envision the organization and get us growing and launching back out again into the culture and communities and schools and families.
And again, like I said, 1980s, even before he started the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, we used to interview him because he was kind of the go-to expert when we were wondering about AIDS and STDs and all sorts of things. So that has been a very long history. But now, as you've been involved with this, you actually had a chance to do testimony in front of the Texas State Board of Education. Now, I recognize that some of you listening right now don't live in the state of Texas, but you can learn some great lessons, some vicarious lessons about what you can do in your state. But let's, if we can, explain that to individuals, because there are some things called TEKS, which stand for Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And this is something that's supposed to be updated, but it's been a while since they've updated it. So give us the history.
It has been 22 years since the State Board of Education last updated health education standards. So important to understand the difference between standards and curriculum. Standards are standards, the expectations of what students will learn in classrooms that drive curriculum decisions at local school districts. So these standards were revamped this last year. Actually, it started about 3 years ago. A number of a very thorough review process involving national and state experts, local community professionals, and educators, all working together to make this the best document it could be for really what should be another decade or more it should hold for all children in Texas.
And again, these are hearings that last for hours. Now, you sent me the links, and I'm glad that once it's recorded, I can fast forward past some of them, because, I mean, you just got to have the patience of a saint to do this, but it's important because what is happening is a real battle. Now, many of our listeners would understand the issue of abstinence, what's sometimes called abstinence only, and some mischaracterizations that take place. But in addition to that, you have all sorts of other individuals that are associated with Planned Parenthood and SICUS and a variety of others. And they want to get all of their ideas in there. So give us kind of a sense of all the topics that were being addressed there as they were considering those standards and those various kinds of things that necessarily need to be part of the skill set for young people that are going to be in public school.
Well, interesting. So I mentioned these are health education standards, of which there's one of 6 strands is dedicated to reproductive and sexual health.
Mm-hmm.
So then within that becomes standards really beginning at 5th grade with puberty and anatomy and physiology, developmental changes coming through 5th graders, and then on up into middle school, 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade. Health class is not required at the high school level any longer, so it was really important to look at the middle school standards and what would be taught to all middle school children in Texas. So beyond just puberty and anatomy and physiology, there were extended information, comprehensive information, as I like to say, actually, about healthy relationships, communication, setting boundaries, refusal skills, sexually transmitted diseases, preventing pregnancy, STDs, STIs, and also an important ad we saw was the emotional risks of early sexual activity.
Let me just mention, too, that if you find yourself saying, I'd like to get some of this information because I'm fighting this same battle in my school district, you can go to Medical Institute, or else it's medinstitute.org. We do have a link there, and if you can click on the picture there of Lori, it will take you to that website, and I think you're going to find some of that very helpful because there are free materials, there's a store for some of the books, there's videos and a variety of other issues. And just before we get into some of the other specifics, I thought maybe I'd set the scene by the fact that when we deal with this issue of sex education, it does seem to me, Lori, that the stakes are higher than they ever were. Since I'm the old guy around the table, maybe not as old as Dr. McElhaney, but pretty old, I can remember a time growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area in Berkeley where there were concerns about STDs. But there were really only 2 that we ever talked about. Both of those were curable with various kinds of antibiotics. Now, we can all debate on how many there are, but at least 3 dozen I think most people will agree with. Some of them are not curable, some are fatal. So the stakes for sex education are higher, I would think, than they've ever been before. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. The Centers for Disease Control says we are in an epidemic. Of course, we're talking pandemics, but an epidemic of STD or STI infection growing increasingly among young people. About half of all infections are in young people under 25, and that's millions and millions that we know of each year. And yet so often, because STDs are most often asymptomatic, people aren't aware they're even infected and continue to spread them through sexual activity, we continue to have an increase. I would say it's interesting, though, while STDs are raising and continue to raise to these epidemic levels, the pregnancy, birth, abortion, and sexual activity rates are not increasing.
I thought that's interesting.
They've been at a decline for the last 20 years, reaching some of their lowest points ever. And there's a number of different complex reasons why we see those numbers, some things going down, STDs going up, and really, to me, it shows clearly that sex is more dangerous now than it was before. Also shows that young people, we haven't studied and learned all the kinds of sexual activity they're involved with that may be putting them at risk that may not be captured in particular questionnaires or surveys. So we have a lot to learn to figure out that dynamic, but it's an important part of this conversation because many of the groups advocating for what is called comprehensive sex education, more on contraception, more on abortion information, would uphold that those rates are getting worse when really they've been getting better for the last 20 years.
Let's take a break. When we come back, maybe give a parental advisor because we're going to get into some of the specifics. And frankly, maybe you might want young ears to hear these, but if you have a young person at home right now, especially during this Thanksgiving week, it might be a good time for them to listen in and learn a little bit more. We'll talk about all that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Before Thanksgiving and Christmas push the election from our minds, we need to remind ourselves how wildly inaccurate polling organizations were in 2020. We should recognize that political polling has always been an inaccurate science. Kristen Soltis Anderson reminds us that in 1936, Literary Digest declared Alf Landon would be the next president. The Gallup organization that year got it right, only to later be embarrassed by being on the wrong side of the Dewey defeats Truman upset. 4 years ago, the pollsters did not predict that Donald Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton. We were assured that they caught their mistakes and would be more accurate this time. A few hours into the election night, it was obvious that these pollsters were wrong not only with the presidential race, but with the races for U.S. Senate along with the races for state legislatures. Back in 2012, the polls were off because pollsters didn't call enough cell phones. Then in 2016, they were off because they missed voters without college degrees. This time, the critics said they were missing the shy Trump voters. But in a previous commentary, I mentioned that most pollsters denied this group even existed. And the argument might work for the presidential race, but it certainly can't explain why there was no huge blue wave for the House, Senate, and state legislatures. Another argument being used is the Trump factor. He is a polarizing figure in American politics. That may explain why the presidential polls were accurate in Maine and South Carolina, but it fails to explain why the polls were so far off in the Senate contest in those states. While the pollsters are trying to figure all of this out, I have a recommendation for you. Don't trust the polls. Perhaps they will fix their survey techniques over time, but we don't have to listen to them until they do. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Larry Kuykendall with us today, and we're talking about the Medical Institute for Sexual Health and these what are called TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, which is part of what is actually put together by the State Board of Education. By the way, we've talked about that with Dr. Ray Boland in terms of origins and things like that. So these are in all sorts of different areas, but these have to do with the health issues. But Laurie, for just a minute, since we are talking about what was happening in Texas, I have noticed a lot of national focus on what happens in Texas. National issues. New York Times has written about this. There have been a number of things, I think NPR and some others. So why is this important beyond just this one state of Texas? What's going on?
I think for several reasons. I'm glad that you asked, because I think that people have seen Texas as this, very conservative, put whatever the labels you want to add into there in a political climate. And with that has been our long-held focus on abstinence education. With that also has come some pretty alarming statistics about where we rank in teen pregnancy. We're the highest for repeat teen births. So there's a lot of interest in Texas. We're also a big state. 5.5 million children in Texas schools drive textbook markets nationally also. So I think people are concerned about what we're teaching here, because what is taught will be what is bought.
Yes.
There's also a concern and an interest over what many would say the abortion industry and dollars that would follow when more information is available, resources given, referrals made for children to some of the abortion providers and other contraception and family planning clinics and such in the area. So it's very interesting and contentious, as you can imagine, the last 15 months have been.
Anybody that would like to find out more, they can find some of the links there, and it gets a little contentious. And you've got various groups in here. One, I'll just mention this in your press release, Power to Decide. That came originally from a group that was called the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy. And they talk about this idea of consent. Now, who would be against consent? You know, the advocates for youth define consent as both people are actively willing to engage in sexual behavior, and yet that became a big issue. So talk about this idea of consent. What does that mean?
Well, I think Webster's dictionary would help us out even here on a fundamental level. Consent is to affirm or to assent, give approval for, right? It's a moving towards something. And it's important if we're going to help young people avoid sexual activity to move them away from that activity. So we use the term refusal skills instead. And what's even more concerning, if you look at some of the national curriculum providers who would like to be, bought here in Texas, it's easy to find concerning videos and role play activities, which are basically helping young people learn to negotiate for sexual activity. So these awkward, uncomfortable, really sexualizing conversations, activities, and videos in a classroom are not benign. Many have said consent prevents sexual abuse. How does saying yes prevent saying no to sexual abuse, right, is one thing I've tried to simplify for people in there, because consent sounds like a great idea, but yet when you see the curriculum activities, the way it's intended to be taught, it is harmful and sexualizing, normalizes sexual activity for kids.
Well, and again, a lot of what you're talking about is the idea of sexual risk avoidance. In some respects, we have to come back to something we just mentioned a minute ago, and that is, even as we've been in this broadcast, if the statistics are right, some individuals have picked up STDs even in the short amount of time you and I have been talking about, because the numbers are off the charts. And so if we want to prevent young people from getting an STD that may be with them for the rest of their life, that could completely destroy their life, or that they end up getting pregnant, and then as a result have to decide whether to keep the child or go get an abortion and all the other aspects, there is some wisdom in recognizing that sexual risk avoidance, or what we call abstinence, is a very important thing that if we don't teach it, young people are going to be taking their cues from the culture, and that's not necessarily very optimal in terms of their health, is it?
Well, I think it's all in the direction and the single message approach, right? Young people need clear, directive messages to help guide them towards healthy decisions. So, and it's not just pregnancy. I think we've got to be careful. As you already have said, we've talked about STDs and emotional and mental health. Many of the groups that get involved are just looking to prevent pregnancy. We've got some pretty great ways to prevent pregnancy, actually, but not STDs and not the emotional and mental harm as well. So a few years back, we coined a new term in this movement, sexual risk avoidance. People had said abstinence doesn't work. Well, what part of abstinence doesn't work? I've heard people say it works every time, really. But really the approach. And there's a controversy over what really works to prevent the behaviors that put kids at risk. And we do a lot of research and look at a lot of research around the different approaches, what has really mattered. And there's been really a debate, a dialogue, misunderstanding and confusion in the media over what works. So abstinence only, abstinence based, abstinence plus, abstinence focused, it's all very confusing, and people use those terms differently. To me, it's all about the direction of instruction for children, giving a clear message to kids that the best thing they can do to protect their sexual health is to wait until marriage.
Now, one of the things that you and Dr. McElhaney and others have been a part of is a coalition for a new sexual revolution, because you recognize that we don't need to be looking at just what you're doing here in the state of Texas, because you have friends all over the country, all over our listening audience that can be part of that. So what does that mean? Because that's another aspect of something that you've coined a kind of a term and an organization, sort of unofficially, to begin to put together a coalition to speak this issue all over the country.
Well, I think when we look at our culture, there's truly a wave, continued growing wave from the first sexual revolution, where sexual messages, sexual pressure, sexual images, the culture is flooding our kids, pushing them to become sexually involved, normalizing sexual activity. When we look at things like the progression of gender identity and sexual orientation, when we look at the progression of pornography, a number of concerning issues really come back to that root of keeping sex within its intended context of healthy marriage. So we do have friends across the country that Dr. McElhaney has pulled together, and we're looking at really strategies to help change the culture on a bigger scale. Friends who are working on pornography, working on abortion, working on the sexual orientation and gender identity issues, all to come back to how can we really grow healthy children and healthy families by upholding a healthy marriage as the optimal context for sex.
Now, that kind of gets us also into some of the press releases here. One saying teaching non-abstinence birth control gets preliminary okay, but does not include gender identity, sexual orientation, because a lot of what was here had nothing to do with what we would think would be even the issue of sex education, but it had a lot to do with trying to promote the LGBTQ agenda, wasn't it?
There was a lot of pressure really around two issues, the LGBTQ inclusive instruction, and then also this consent education, as we've talked about. And I can clarify on the LGBTQ issue that sexual risk avoidance, avoiding sexual risks, is for all children, that it is inclusive, absolutely. And we know that when we're writing standards for children in classrooms, especially elementary classrooms, even the adults are confused about terminology and language and expression and identity and orientation. All of those complicated concepts are best taught at home, where families can pass on their values to their children. So we kept differentiated instruction for those students, although it was demanded for and called for by many. Perhaps most disheartening to me was the young people saying, I identify as a gay or lesbian person, and I wish I had learned how to have sex in the way that I want to, and things like that, which were just so concerning the children. I saw a testimony this week of a 7-year-old who wanted information on being transsexual. So we decided that it was best for all students to avoid sexual risks, and we wrote inclusive health education teaks for students.
I don't mean to be crass, but I saw something the other day where somebody said, this third grader said that he wanted to change his sex, and he said, in the third grade, I was still kind of wondering what sand tastes like, I mean, we're talking about children at very young ages being encouraged to do things by adults or making decisions that they may regret for the rest of their life. So I want to take a break, but when we come back, I want to open up for questions that you might have, because after all, you may have been dealing with this in your own situation. Maybe you wonder what to say to your own kids. We haven't even gotten into the whole issue of pornography, sexting, and a variety of other things, which I know that you have addressed in the past as a speaker there at Aim for Success, now Just Say Yes. And so there are all sorts of other topics we want to put on the table. And of course, we haven't talked about contraception and condoms and all sorts of other things. So there's a lot more to cover, but I wanted to give you a chance. Maybe you've always wanted to ask a question of an expert. We have Lori Kuykendall with us today, and feel free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. We're talking about sex education in the public schools. We've been talking about this ever since Marlon Maddox started doing some of those interviews with Dr. McElhaney back in the 1980s. But the world has changed dramatically, and that's why we wanted to give you an update, and I think you'll have a chance to hear that. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. In studio with us today, Lori Kuykendall with the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. And how have you been able to respond to the argument that you hear all the time, and that is, well, this is great. You know, certainly some young people want to be taught how to abstain from sex. That's good. But how do you address the issue of, well, we shouldn't be teaching it in the schools at all? Because as I understand, there was at least some pushback from people saying we shouldn't be teaching that in the schools at all. How do you respond to that?
Absolutely. I thank you for bringing this up. We did have some who may be like-minded with you and I in a number of ways say this shouldn't be taught at school. It should be taught at home in the family. And absolutely, families and parents should be the primary sex educator of their children. My background in health education upholds teaching children how to be healthy to help them do better in school also. So from that background, from a place of health and science, we've known that teaching children about health, which includes sexual health, age-appropriate, medically accurate, culturally relevant, all of those things in a way that impacts their lives, helps them do better in school. So I would say, yes, teach your children at home, please, and allow us to teach the kids at school who aren't getting this good information. And that's a lot of them. And so there are certainly lots of misinformation in our world. I think we have an opportunity in a school classroom to bring them life-giving truth in a way that, again, medically accurate, age-appropriate, and upholds many parents' value as well. Of course, in Texas and in most states, there's the right to opt out of classroom instruction.
Right.
And I think that should be upheld, and parents should have the right to not have their children participate in sex ed or any other kind of ed that they don't want their children being taught. But I think overall, we've came to such a good place of good health education standards for the kids in Texas that will affect kids all over the nation.
So I talked about one extreme. I don't want anything taught in the public schools. The other extreme is, oh, well, Laura, you're just naive. They're just going to be young kids that are going to get sexually involved anyway. So we need to teach them how to put on a condom. We have to teach them how to use contraception. We need to teach them all sorts of things. How do you respond to that?
Well, I appreciate the other side as well, right? There's kind of always a trick and a challenge here. I think part of it comes back to what is best for kids and also really looking at sexual activity rates among young people. It is a myth, a fierce misconception that all kids are having sex. We even help the young people understand that. Most teenagers don't have sex. Centers for Disease Control verifies that in every state in the United States. So they track that, and as I shared earlier, that rate has been going down and down and down. Fewer kids are having sex on a national level as well. And we can talk about why and what they may be doing instead and some of those concerns, but most kids will wait. And the other part of that is just like with academic standards, we uphold what's best for children. All kids go to college. All kids pass their grades. All kids are expected to do this, and this academically. And I think it's the same kind of unified, consistent messaging in health that should be upheld too. We don't teach them don't smoke and don't drink, but oh yeah, by the way, here's a filter if you want to not get as much nicotine in or whatever, on drugs and alcohol. If McDonald's wants to sell hamburgers, they don't say ours are great, but here's you might check out Burger King's also. I like to use that illustration because people say the abstinence but message is a good one. I say abstinence but is not clear. It's abstinence, sure, but go down the road and sex would be fine too. So I think we want to give a clear, consistent message, a primary prevention message, as the Centers for Disease Control calls it.
Yes. And again, I've seen some studies that have said, well, if they're using these devices, these are very effective. But then if you read the fine print, it's when they're used correctly and consistently. You have kids, I have kids. I can't think of my teenagers, and the words correctly and consistently fit very well with their behavior. So that's something to think about. But let's, before we go any further, take some phone calls. So we'll head out to California first. And let's see, I got to push the right button there, which is, I'm just learning this new system. There, Michael, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, I may have missed some of this discussion. I'm a psychologist out here in Northern California, and several of us have tried to, kind of oppose some of the massive numbers of bills that the Democrats in Sacramento have been pushing, and to no avail. California Family Council even gave hundreds of what's her name, Schreier's book out.
Abigail Schreier, yes.
Yeah, and they don't. It doesn't seem to be make a dent. And I just wonder what Lori had to say about the political aspect of all of this.
Okay, Lori.
Well, one thing I like to say, we've been most successful keeping the argument in a public health perspective with health data from the Centers for Disease Control and other nationally recognized sources. As I like to say, take away politics, morals, and religion. Let's look at it from a health perspective. We also know when the elephants fight, the grass loses. And sometimes in all of that battle and all the discourse, there's just a lot of confusion that happens. And politics, morals, and religion play into it for sure. But can we come to the table of looking at from a health perspective? And then also a second strategy that has been effective is involving parents, and lots of them. We call it a tsunami strategy, where you get as many parents involved, and sometimes that's from church groups, scout groups, whoever groups there are. Many parents are simply sort of in the dark, aren't aware of the concerning kind of content being proposed. So know what's being taught, know every word, every slide, every video that your children will be taught. And when there are communities that are wanting to oppose a particular curriculum or particular laws, expose those kinds of dangerous messages and what they're really trying to teach children. A lot of people are just ignorant and need to be brought into light on what's being proposed and gathered with others to oppose it.
Let's, if we can, talk about what is available at the Medical Institute, because for Michael or other individuals, wherever they might be located around the country, that gets back to, I think, the genius that Dr. McElhaney brought to the focus, and that is to recognize that we don't have to even use religious arguments, political arguments. We can just use health arguments. And if you go to medinstitute.org, don't even have to remember all that, just simply go to Point of View and click on the picture next to Lori. You'll find, first of all, a lot of view-free materials that are available, and so you can find some of these various articles, some of the posts. There's a store that has some of this material, and I know that over the years, these infamous slides that Dr. McElhaney put together have been used even in our own context many times, just to help young people and adults and most importantly school administrators recognize what is at stake. If you really had good, accurate information about the number of STTs, the kind of impact that this is having on young people, the life-changing impact that it's having on some, just the health issues alone coming from the CDC and others are enough to really make your case. And if at that point people are going to simply reject it, then you can use a line that's used against us all the time. Follow the science, because the science is really on one side, and that is to recognize the incredible danger to young people as they get sexually involved with one another.
Yes, and I was also thinking, Kerby, that we would need to look to us to help. That's what Medical Institute does. So we had calls come in recently from Utah, Vermont, New York. That's what we're about, is really what we call an influencer-focused leadership, helping the influencers, which it sounds like your caller and others may exactly be in that place where we could help parents and community activists have the information they need to go forward. We've got some good strategies along with the science that can help make a difference.
You know, I talked about young people. I know we're coming to a break, but I've said before, you have daughters, I have daughters, that young girls are even more vulnerable as a group than any other in terms of sexually transmitted diseases, aren't they?
They are, from a chemical, biological, physiological perspective. Also, they're more susceptible on some of the emotional and mental health issues as well, and they carry the greater burden with pregnancy. So we definitely want to uphold the value of girls and the value of waiting.
It's another slogan, don't protect the girls. We right now have the hashtag Me Too movement. We've had concerns about sexual predators and all the rest. Well, this is just one more issue to address there as well. Let's take a break, though. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, we have this press release that gives you kind of a summary of some of the things we've covered. But if you find yourself saying, I really want more information, I might even want to buy a book or two, well, those are also available at the website, and so we'll talk about that in just a minute. But if you'd like to join the conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll wind down our conversation today with Lori, but I just wanted you to be able to ask her a question or make a comment, so feel free to do so. Visit our website, pointofview.net. We have all the links that you need, and we'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Lori Kuykendall with us, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head back out to California again. Shelley, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi.
What would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, I love the idea of you protecting the girls. I love the movement idea. I'm kind of on the other side of the spectrum. I have an autistic son. He can be out of control sometimes. He's about 5'5" at age 11. He's going to be a big boy. So we always get birth control for girls. Why don't we do something like get a shot for the boys? Like, is there anything out there to give boys some kind of birth control? Because my son, I don't know what his future is going to be right now. But all I can say is I wish that there was some way that he can be having some birth control so I don't have to worry about his genetics. I had tested. He has something called a BBS10 gene. So if he ever decides to have kids, he needs to make sure that that girl does not have BBS10, or they're going to have babies that have weird toes. So I know there's things wrong with them. So I need to see if there's anything is going on for a boy to get some birth control shots.
Okay. Any thoughts about that? I don't know much about that.
Well, a couple of things we talk about a lot in this discourse is the difference between classroom instruction and counseling intervention, right? So much of what we've been talking about today is for a classroom environment where you're teaching all children. And it sounds like this caller has specific needs that would be better dealt with in a clinical or counseling intervention kind of situation. I am aware of some beginnings of hormonal contraception for males that are out there, but I think it's again, not such a simple answer either in terms of complexity of STDs and all of the other behavioral and emotional and mental health issues involved. So it would be tricky to answer in our environment today, but I think it raises a concern. I actually just heard last week some data looking at how autistic children are being sort of drafted into the transgender movement. They are susceptible to some of these ideas in terms of a new way to get attention or a new way to, you don't fit in that body, try this body kind of ideas. And I think that's something to be aware of too, and to continue to uphold truth and design and all of those. It's complex. I feel for this listener. And work with moms at our church that deal with special needs children. It is very hard. So I wouldn't want to try to give a simple answer by any means, but I think there's a number of issues to be dealt with there. And I appreciate the call.
We just talked about transgender a minute ago with Michael and Abigail Shire, who's been on the program and now has been blocked and all of that. But I've oftentimes said that people always say that a picture's worth 1,000 words. No, a graph is worth 1,000 words. And you've got a graph, if I remember right, that actually shows how there's been this explosion in transgender. But it isn't that there are more kids that are transgender. It is that there's social media that plants those ideas. And so you have this kind of rapid onset gender dysphoria that we were talking about with her. And in some respects, what we're dealing with now in terms of sex education is happening outside of the classroom. It's happening in the social media, isn't it?
The cultural messages are strong. That wave, that tide is pushing hard against our kids to mold them away from their true identity and to explore and try different things and be swept into different social identities, different communities. Families will take you in if you want to be different than what your family thinks you should be. It's really getting scary out there to me in a number of ways. I think we've got to continue to come back to science, as we've said before. And as you reference this chart we have that speaks to the tidal wave of social media that has kind of brought kids out to these identities. And we're beginning to see even in places like Europe where those that transition to another gender are now kind of coming back. I'm afraid we're in a time of social experiment where we really don't know what all the fallout of it will be. But I do hope we'll curb back to health and male and female and upholding what's best from a sexual and reproductive health perspective.
Yes, so transgender regret is something that's been talked about before. But one other aspect of social media, and I know you've spoken to this before, the availability of pornography as well as sexting and some of the things I know you've spoken about in some of these classrooms. This is just a much more difficult time for young people growing up, and a lot of that has been facilitated by these cell phones, hasn't it?
Yes, technology is both a tool for good and a tool for harm. And I think just like we train up our children to handle fire appropriately, which again can be for good or can be for harm, parents must be involved in helping technology be used for good. We can't throw it away. We can't keep kids off of devices, but we can help them make good and healthy decisions navigating this scary world and many pressures, lies, misinformation out there, and turn those for good.
Let's see if we can talk about some of the resources that are available at your website, because you have all sorts of brochures and things of that nature, some about the brain. Matter of fact, I've said before to Dr. McElhaney, I learned so much more about brain studies, first from him. Of course, now we have all sorts of people doing studies on what is called neuroplasticity. His book on Hooked, Brain Science, on how casual sex affects human development. And you've got some various videos and DVDs and a variety of others. So these are parents out there. In some cases, there may be teachers listening right now. There may be pastors saying, okay, I need all the information I can get. So what will they find when they land at the website?
Well, I would recommend they check out our brand new STI course. Really, it's an online, self-taught 2 to 3 hour time frame for you to really get the lowdown. The latest on sexually transmitted diseases would be my greatest recommendation, fresh and hot off the press. And then our brochures are on sale right now. We're selling them in packs of 50. Happy to let you take a look at those. And, of course, our team, our science team, and myself are available as you all need input, speakers for certain events, events, those kinds of things where we want to be a resource. We've testified at the Texas State Board of Education. We're happy to present at conferences, happy to help those who are testifying in their areas also.
I just mentioned, too, you have an HIV video in case anybody would want to watch that. But most importantly, on the lower right-hand corner, join our newsletter. So there's a way, if people are saying, okay, I just need some kind of day-to-day information. Maybe I'm trying to figure out what I can say to my children or my grandchildren, or I'm wondering about what I can take to my school board, or I've got some real questions about what might be taught in these classes. That's a way in which they can kind of keep up to date with you, isn't it?
Absolutely. Newsletter just went out today, and if they sign up, I'd be happy to get them the one that went out today.
Well, very good. Before we wind down for the day, let's talk about that, because you also have a number of posts, some tweets. The featured video at the moment deals with this whole idea, isn't it just sex right? So, again, this would be something that you could say, maybe I'd like to forward that to my kids or my grandkids, or maybe the parents of kids that I know are there. So there's some resources that you could also use in a way to have an influence, isn't there?
Yes, we want to make it easy for parents to speak into this, for parents to know the great power they have over shaping their growing children's and adolescents' brains, especially as you've said. I think grandparents are really kind of at a loss of how can we save our kids, save in this scary world. And yet there absolutely is truth to be told and guidance and support to be given to help kids do well. And so I want to be about that. And then, of course, decision makers, whether that's in a school environment or a church environment, as you've recommended, we want to be a resource to help get this good information out. It's sort of squelched in the media sometimes, and we have a hard time getting the real story out there sometimes. So we need people on the ground to help us do that.
So again, if you'd like to contact Lori, you can go to medinstitute.org. Of course, they have a phone number there, and you can give them a call. And of course, there's some great resources. And if nothing else, Medical Institute for Sexual Health has been around for a long time, and it's going to be around for a long time in the future. And that's because Lori's heading up some of the organization there. So thank you once again for coming into this program, and look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kerby. It's always a pleasure.
That's all we have for today. I hope that you will appreciate the work that is being done there by the Medical Institute. We have a link for it on our website, and it's a great resource that I think you can put to use anytime you might want to do so. And, of course, you can find all of it at our website, pointofview.net. And you've been listening to Point of View.
Election day has come and gone, so tell me, do people like you need to be more or less vigilant, more or less informed, more or less involved in making an impact? I think the answer is clear. Those who value freedom of conscience and religious liberty need to do more than ever to stand up for what the founders gave us and put America on track for greatness. Yes, we face challenges, but it's in the hard times that the greatest victories are seized and won. I urge you today, right now, to seize this opportunity and join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Be part of the solution our nation needs. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The election is not the end of anything. It's another beginning. And when you join the Truth Team, you make it possible for millions of people to get the real news they desperately need and the practical marching orders that Kerby and the team at Point of View Radio give each day. Join us now in this critical moment. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.